So I think we'll start with Jenny. Can you talk about, you went with the public auction and why that was your choice and why that worked for you?
This is not, hi, is this on?
Yeah, you just have to hold a little bit close to your mouth, but it's on.
Oh, is that?
Yes, it's very on.
Apparently so. I didn't know I had that big of a mouth. Is it on? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, we, in that hurried, frantic stage that we were in, determining whether or not to go public or private. I'm a mediator. I kind of know how to look at agreements. So for me, the most important thing about the public agreement was that after they had completed the debris removal, they would tack the cost of that debris removal onto the end of our insurance settlement. And were our insurance settlement to be less than the amount that it cost, we would have to repay the cost. If our insurance paid it all out, we didn't have to pay them back at all. So we didn't pay them back at all. We had a tribal leader, Chumash, on the site, just being, conscious of the potential, existence of any kind of sacred space, sites, and that was, for me, a positive thing. A lot of people thought it was a negative thing because it would slow them down. We were rooting for the Chumash, and we were very happy to find out that they were wonderfully kind, the public guys. They saved handprints from my children, which they're not allowed to do. And they were kind enough to say to us, you realize your foundation is going away. And if you need to build a $400,000 foundation, you better take that into account. So we knew that having our foundation gone was in our plan. That's what we wanted to have happen. But we wouldn't have been given an option. So you need to know that going in, but net, our cost was zero.
Thank you, Corey.
Hi, yeah, after the Woolsey fire, I went to every meeting I could possibly attend. And the county kept, I kept raising my hand, asking if that unique debris removal meant that they would take out the foundation as well. And they would hem and haw, but finally give an answer that yes, we take down everything. It goes back to Virgin land. And unless you can prove that your foundation will meet county codes. So my original foundation was done in 1985. And I knew it was a good foundation, and
Corey's an architect.
So anyway, I decided that would not be the way to go. It cost me close to $400,000 for a new foundation, and I didn't have that kind of insurance policy that would allow that kind of expense. So I decided against it. I did it privately. I had some money in the insurance policy, not enough, but some to cover that debris removal. And I told all of my neighbors up in, I'm up Yellow Hill Road, county line. I told all my neighbors what I had learned. And a couple of them listened to me, but two of them did not. They had the county take out their foundation. They were newer foundations, probably from 2000, I think. Both of those properties are still vacant and unbuilt, and they're not building on them. That they were both on the market because they realized they would not be able to build economically with it. So that was my reasoning.
Thank you very much. I chose private because our geological engineer had been a long time working for the, he, at that point, he was the neighbor, and he had worked on the property for a couple of owners prior to us. And he also had lost his home, and he worked for the county for decades, and he'd been in the business for a long, long time. He was one of the first people we invited up, and he said, and our foundation was from 1970, somewhere between 1971 and 1973. And he said, keep it, because even if you have to pour a new foundation, it will be better to pour it on top of this one than on raw land. I didn't really understand what he was talking about then, but I trusted him because of his experience. But now I actually, I'm still rebuilding. Took us quite some time to get a permit, and I will get into that later, but we didn't have to get a grading permit because we had our old foundation. And that, and we'll get, this isn't gonna be a deep dive into permitting unless people wanna bring up questions later, because of our limits of time and where I think folks may be at, but grading permit is, not having to get a grading permit is a pretty big deal, in terms of process. So that was why we were glad, we went with a private company. There were a private company or two out there who were unscrupulous. But there are many who do a good job, and we are glad to share experience from, and I know there's maybe people online, there's people who are gonna be here later today, there's Facebook groups I'm gonna introduce you all to, where there's a lot of information on folks who can make recommendations of people who do a really good job and are scrupulous if you want to go private. So once you're, before you do the debris removal, one of the other excruciating decisions is sifting, do I sift through the debris? How do I sift through the debris? What am I looking for? What do I do with my stuff? I don't even have a home. Like if I find something, what if I find a treasure? What do I do with it? All of those decisions, many of which are highly personal. But one of the things when we were talking about our experiences that was common, and I think applies to everybody, is that if you are going to, if you're gonna go sift through your debris, and some people may choose not to, which is also completely understandable, it's really important to be safe and to not underestimate the health risks. Do use a ventilator mask, hazmat suit. It looks like you're destroying home, and that's very emotionally hard, but it's also physically hazardous. And Corey, you told a story that I think is on point for this, so
Well,
can you share what your experience?
Should tell a little bit about my vast history of natural disasters. In 1986, we finished, my late husband, British architect Nick Roberts, and I finished building our house up at County Line. And we lived happily in that house for 7 years with our daughter, Bryony Roberts, until the Green Meadows fire, which was a fire that started in Thousand Oaks. That took down that house, and fortunately, we were able to get a couple of carloads of stuff, took it to my parents' place in Las Flores, and then that house burned down a week later. I remember going back to that house right after it burned down. Nobody had even heard of an N95 mask. I think I might have had a kerchief around my face, but I'm not even sure of that. And I didn't spend a lot of time sifting through. I think I got a saucepan, and then I just said, there's nothing here that I could possibly want. But we did build a fire hardened studio up in Malibu about 20 years ago, and that made it through the Woolsey fire. Unfortunately, the main house on that property did not, and it was the same thing. I went to that site. I saw that there really was nothing I cared to sift through and find on that property. But I have to say that it wasn't until the Woolsey fire that I realized why I have this chronic lung condition. It is because of all these wildfires and sifting through this stuff. And I can't tell you how I hope all of you will listen and be protected when you go to your sites. It's very important.
Thank you, and I would say, the most hazardous place is on the site. this is a I know we have a doctor in the house, this is a non-medical advice, this is just from experience. You know, seeing the color of what my family member, you know, coughed up after being on the site versus just being in the community. So that's my research experiment of one unit, but also just, there's gonna be, until debris is cleared, sometimes the air around is gonna be not great. And I'm not saying you have to wear ventilator masks, but we wore N95 masks in Malibu, for several months, especially on bad wind days. And I think it helped to prevent us from getting any kind of chronic lung issues. And we also had strong filters inside, air filters. So those are some recommendations, and that kind of is a segue into our next topic, I think, of, you know, dealing with the physical toll and the mental toll that this is taking, and everybody has their own response, but I don't know anybody who went through this who doesn't go through an acute trauma experience, and some kind of, you know, sleep disruption, sometimes physical pains that are like, what is this? Is this the flu? I had a lot of those, like, I think I'm getting the flu. I was like, no, I'm going through catastrophic loss. And that's why I suddenly feel like I can't walk for a second, or, you know, so I think some of that is unavoidable, but there are also things that we did, I think, that were helpful, and also the mental toll. I mean, the grief, the dysregulation, the like fog, the feeling like I don't know what to do next. I thought I was a really smart person. I thought I knew how to do things, and I like what? All of that is a big challenge, I think, for most people. And so one of the things that we were talking about, I'll just mention, that was said at one of these kinds of events after the Woolsey fire, and I listened and I took note, and then I learned the hard way, like the kid who just needs to put their hand on the stove to really figure it out. And that's being, you're not gonna be a good driver for about 6 months. And there's many people in LA County and Ventura County, because there's also the mountain fire, who are not good drivers right now. They just don't have good judgment. 2 months after the fire, I was picking up my son in LA, and I thought, finally, I feel normal driving. I could feel myself off for those first couple months, but then this day I was like, whew, finally got this. That was the day I didn't see the woman on my left coming. Luckily, she was going really fast, actually, but I was going slowly. It was only car damage, no one got hurt, but I literally did not see, I was turning left on a side street, I literally did not see her coming. I have a very safe driving record. I went, that's what they mean. So be extra vigilant, mark your calendars for 6 months. The day that if any day comes before 6 months and you're like, I think I'm good. Look at this face, no, you're not, you know, so just be careful. So I wonder if there's anything else that you two can share about that you think is, would be helpful, that you learn either about your self-care or things that blind spots that you now see that you have that you would have done differently.
Well, my daughter was 12 when we lost the first house, and my husband and I, being both architects, once the shock and the grief was over about losing the house, it was all of a sudden we have a new house to design. That was exciting. And I don't know why, but we didn't think to get counseling for our daughter. She not only did she lose our house, but she lost her treasured grandparents' house a week later. And it didn't come up, or we didn't discuss it. Well, we did discuss it, of course, but not in therapeutic terms until she was in therapy many years later and talking to a counselor or therapist, and she mentioned the fire, and the therapist said, wait a minute, what fire? And it's the first time she had talked to anybody with that skill about that. And I think it's really important to address that with children now. And I don't have any referrals for that, but I do think it's a very good idea.
I think that's,
Totally agree. And I think our kids in many ways could be our mentors. In my case, I had no idea what I was doing, but 3 or 4 days in a row, I was sifting through with no mask, no nothing, all of the debris. There was nothing to find, and I kept looking, and I kept wishing and hoping. And finally, my daughter was sitting there, and they were on a swing, her fiance now, and she said, "Mom, it's time to stop picking through the bones of the losses and of our family. We need to come back to life." And that for me was the word that stopped me in my tracks. Of course, then I went next door and found my neighbor's wedding ring, and I was extremely jealous, but I just couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. Now, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, as you all will be if you let someone diagnose you. But I was finding myself waking up at night, screaming and/or jumping out of the bed and landing, and more than once on my head. It was something that I couldn't process. It was down there in my subconscious mind, and it kept coming up in my dreams. And I was prescribed a drug that you would take that would help with night terrors. It didn't help at all. And then in your fire, in our fire, this Palisades fire, they came back like full force, because I was so empathizing with you guys. I was so aware of what the air smells like and how it feels to just have this incredible ache in your heart and pain in your soul and your body not being your friend. And I literally didn't know what to do. 2 things. Malibu Foundation provided EMDR therapy. It was great until they cut it off because COVID kicked in. So they stopped. And we also had group therapy, not really therapy, but group meetings that were facilitated by psychotherapists. Mixed reviews. But I think really, really important is I got out and I met with my women yogi group. And we practiced yoga 5 days a week. And then we studied the 10 habits of the yogis, which include all kinds of things, like altering your diet and altering the way in which you process your day, and beautiful, beautiful lessons. I thought it was the material I was learning as a good student that was helping me. It wasn't. In retrospect, I look back and all of those women are still together, meeting, loving each other, supporting each other. And I think it was the community aspect of that, of having a tribe, just being in a tribe. Because everything else I felt totally isolated. Like I was the only one going through it. And that's because we have to deal with debris removal. We have to deal with figuring out who our insurance agent is and do we like them. And if we don't, we gotta work with them. And are we gonna have a whole nother, in my case we had to hire an insurance company to go after, our own, a lawyer to go after our own insurance. So, those kinds of distractions kept me from being in my body. So please be in your body. Because it will come up and bite you, like it came up and bit me during this last ordeal. And I'm still feeling shaky. I know that it's possible to have your subconscious mind just play tricks on you. And it thinks I did drive into the fire, this is the last thing I'll say. I did drive back into the fire mistake. I wanted to see if our house was there, my whole family was on the beach at Zuma. I drove into it. And I watched an electrical storm. And I was watching it rain down, and I was looking at the corner that I thought was my property. Nothing there. Found out later 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit is what it takes to explode marble statuary. So that plus, you can imagine the stove, the cars, everything was gone. What was I doing there for 3 days? Sifting through ash. So I'd say my judgment was way off, and I was battling, you know? So, yeah. Hard one.
Yeah, and I think we talked about, we need to give ourselves and our families a lot of grace right now. And that was important. It was important in my family to do that, we were going through a lot of pain and I also had a child. It's a little unusual situation because he was 15 and he had just moved in with us from foster care 5 months before. This was his first safe home. And this did galvanize me to try to model something like safety. I mean, even though it was like, oh my gosh, like the very fundamental thing, like this house we didn't have. But we could try to show that we can go through hard things without being hard on each other. That was important, and the importance of remembering that the best humor in a family is born in the gallows. So we did do a lot of bonding. And also this idea that, you know, we did go through our feelings, but I tried, and I think all the more so as a parent, to not unpack my bags and live there. Go through it with it as much as I could, you know, as I needed to, but also not to unpack my bags and live there. And I asked my son the other day, who's now 22, and has just accepted an invitation to go to an audition in Amsterdam next week. I couldn't be prouder of him. Just to give you a bit of a happy story, but like, yeah, we started out like, oh my God, in the drags, like on the mat, yeah. And I asked him, I said, what would you want kids or people with kids to know? He said, along the lines of what she said, I underestimated the impact. Don't underestimate the impact on kids, teens. Some kids may be crying and letting you know all the time. Some might be isolating. Some might be changing, you know, some might be like, it's all good, but it's not really. And it was really important to him to have ways to be with us and be in community. And also he learned that it's important to have time to mourn our lost dreams, but we still can dream. And along the lines of our architecture plan. And one can come to a point where you're okay with the new dreams. Never, I mean, you can hear the welling up, and I'm never gonna entirely lose that loss of a dream of supplying a safe home for my son. And we're still rebuilding. But we have created safety. We've like little birds, we've picked up pieces and tried to create something that's important. And I think that those are some things that have helped, as well as having taking care of physical health. Absolutely. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Did any rules I had about eating a whole bag of candy go out the window for those? I was like, first 2 months, like, you do whatever you need to do, but we did pay attention to our physical health, and that was, I think, really important. So as we're picking up the pieces, you know, some of us, okay, thank you. We're just gonna touch on a moment for a couple minutes. How many of you are struggling with like whether you're going to rebuild Is that, or how many of you know you wanna rebuild already? And some of you, and maybe some of you can't. Or either emotionally, financially, or, you know, or maybe some of you don't want to. These two, I think, had permitting and rebuilding is multiple sessions. We're not gonna get it covered in a couple minutes, although I'm happy to take any questions. But I think these two had something in common. This one was number 29, rebuilt in Malibu. And she also rebuilt early in Ventura County, in unincorporated Ventura County. And I think both of you had the common experience that you got your plans in early, somehow you were able to get it together, to get your plans in really early. I am not the poster child for this one, but there's other things that there's reasons why I've written about it, and I'm happy to talk to you about it, but there's things we have done right. But I wanna talk about, you know, the benefits, if you can, getting in early. What can you talk about that for a minute, like what your experience was in that? Maybe Corey.
Yeah.
Well, my situation is a little bit unusual because I'm an architect, so I had everything at my fingertips as far as getting plans in early. And I hand through my plans, usually I would hire a draftsman, but she was busy, and I couldn't take the time to wait for her to have enough time to create my drawings. So I did them myself. I got them in. I think I was the first one into Ventura County with, I should say, the grand plan, which actually would have required some caissons. After getting the bids, I pulled it and redid the plans, completely redid the plans and submitted. So I was then second, I think, in Ventura County, still a lucky member. And having the skill as an architect, I was able to get it through very quickly. And that is an unusual situation, but I do highly recommend you get an architect early on, get your plans in, at least get some design ideas going, because there are going to be so many people in line. It's going to be, you know.
And I'll just add to that, just kind of translating it to those of you who aren't architects, specifically, you know, some things that I think can be universal is if you can find an architect who either has experience in your jurisdiction, and that goes for your engineers as well, or who are highly skilled in not just their trade, but in making relationships, and navigating, complex systems. I think that is helpful. Jenny, you wanna talk a second about your experience in the.
We were all of us owner builders, so that was, I think, an important component in our making it to the front of the line by holding a place early on. And so we were able to move fairly expeditiously, even though the demand becomes extraordinary. And I would just say what we did learn was, don't go out and get a bunch of bids from a bunch of companies, especially the modular companies, because this will eat up so much time, and what you want to do is be in line. Even if you have to modify the plans. There were no plans for our house. It's the oldest one in Malibu Park. The plans burned in a fire many years ago. So we didn't have plans. We just had a footprint. And we went into the expedite line because we said we will stay and conform to the footprint plus 10%. That's it. And it was worth it to us. Not just that time is money, but we want to go home. We want to go home. And you better tell them, Diane, break the news. How many of the homes in county?
Yes, I will make this point because it is important.
It's important.
So to set realistic expectations, like there are, you know, we're hearing, you know, that we want to get people home, we want to get people home quickly from our, you know, wonderful officials, and we want to hold them to it. The Woolsey example has not been the poster child of success. We're still under half of the homes, of the 400 some odd homes lost in the city of Malibu have been rebuilt, and about 16% of the 688 homes lost in unincorporated LA County have been rebuilt. I don't have the numbers for unincorporated Ventura County, I think they're a little better. But it's and some of that is personal decisions, there's a lot of complexity that needs to be understood about why, but some of it is process. So with that, we'll, you know, if anybody has any more questions about this is a huge topic, needs to be talked about a lot more, but I wanna move on to introduce some folks who are gonna be joining us today. We have Naomi Goldman, who is going to share with us information about emergency resources. She's worked with the Red Cross, she's worked with local offices and done a lot of emergency response work, and she's gonna be sharing with us. We have Mike Newhouse, who's from the Planning Commission for City of Los Angeles, but also has expertise in insurance and is gonna be touching on insurance do's and don'ts. And we have Dr. Shai Roy, who, aside from being an amazing cardiac specialist and trustee at Santa Monica City College, also just lost his house in Big Rock. So he's also here to have our support. So they're each gonna speak for a few minutes and then we're gonna open it up to a conversation with you all and anyone on Zoom.
Sure. Okay, I guess I'll go first. Good morning, good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Naomi Goldman, and I, among other things, am a public information officer for the American Red Cross, as well as a disaster responder and other roles. So I have been on the field quite a bit in terms of disaster response, as well as long-term recovery and resilience efforts, including Woolsey. So I'm going to talk very quickly. Most of you, many of you have probably been inundated with information, whether it's daily briefings, emails, etc., from the county and the city and other joint information centers about the multitude of resources that are available for individuals and households, as well as resources for small businesses and nonprofits. And I just want to touch on a few quick things. One, it's really important to know that there are new resources that are coming online that I'm going to tell you where to find. In terms of financial assistance, there's a range of direct cash assistance, grants, and loans, and they're in categories for individuals and families and households, as I mentioned, for businesses, and there are new resources available for impacted workers. That means the category, that means the category of people who may not live in the fire zip codes, but work there. That includes people who were gardeners and childcare workers and people who were working in the homes that were impacted. One thing to be mindful of, while many resources will exist over a long period of time, there are those that have hard and fast deadlines. One important deadline I'm going to mention, if you or people you know have not applied for FEMA housing assistance, that deadline is coming up on March 10th. There are other grants and opportunities that sometimes have been so deluged by applications, they have to pause, they do run out of resources. So again, it's really important that if there are things you haven't sought out, do them sooner rather than later.
Oh.
Because they're not.
That was an important point she was making.
Yeah. Some of them are finite and some of them will run out. So I want to mention just a few quick things. Number one, if you don't know about disaster recovery centers, there is one on the west side in the space that was West Side Pavilion, which is now the UCLA Research Park. Consider it a one-stop shop. You can walk in 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., and every resource you could possibly want is there. From help with financial assistance, housing, utilities, food, debris removal, everything you can think of is all there. You can also apply for FEMA assistance online, and there are phone numbers as well. The other thing I'm going to mention is these lovely QR codes are here and in the lobby. And the first one that's called LA Wildfire Recovery Resources. I would personally encourage you to scan that. It is something I've put together as a PIO, which has every possible resource, city, county, state, federal, for individuals, for workers, for businesses, in every category that we're talking about, from money to loans to housing to food to utilities, on and on and on. The last thing I'll just kind of mention is this. There is a category of people who did not live in the fire zones, but are greatly impacted as workers. So there are not only new grants available, but the city and the county has also just opened impacted worker relief and recovery centers, specifically for people who worked in fire zones but don't have proof of residence, because we know there's a lot of people who are impacted by the Palisades fire and others who don't physically live in those spaces. So my meta message is, please take a look at all the resources available, apply for anything and everything that you're interested in sooner rather than later, because things will run out, there are new deadlines, and also keep checking back. This document is getting updated just in the last week. There are new grants and new resources becoming available that you may not get through every daily briefing and email, and we want to make sure you have a dynamic document where you can constantly look for information. I'm also happy to answer questions when we're done, and I will be around. And again, there is resilience on the other side. It is a very long road for recovery, as these folks have mentioned, but there's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of support to help people try to rebuild and regain some stability in their lives. And I know all of us are here to try and be those resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much for hosting this. It's nice to be back here because when I was president of the Santa Monica Democratic Club, we used to have meetings here, and so there's a lot of familiarity being back here. Never thought I'd be back here as a fire victim. What I will say is, part of many of you are involved in the community through Dem clubs, and I can tell you that a lot of my love and support, our family's love and support, have been from friends and people we call family from the Democratic clubs that we've been part of over the last more than a decade, and it's been a really critical part of sort of how we've progressed over the last 6 months. All the things that you said that you talked about. I texted my wife. I was like, you should be here because all of your thoughts are so familiar, on a daily basis, whether it's sifting through that ashes and going through that and, all of those things. And she texted me back, she was like, we're fire people now, fire people stick together. And so we never wanted that, but that's where we are. But for those of you, everybody's been impacted in LA, some of us more directly than others, obviously. But for those of you who are here or online in a support role, and all of this is very complicated, the relationships, etc. I know there are people who don't want to inundate people with messages, etc. What I would say is text, pick up the phone, and show that love, even if somebody doesn't pick up on the other side, because I can tell you we feel it. And the things that have made us cry over the course of the last couple of months have almost always been positive things. It's not the remembering the things that we lost. It's mostly the compassion and the support that we've received from people in the community, and many of them from Dem clubs. And so pick up the phone. It really is meaningful, and I think I probably speak for you guys. It's not a bother. It's not a bother. It's really meaningful, that love and support. Secondly, I do want to plug Naomi's document. Hopefully it'll be in the chat, and the QRS codes. Looking through that last night. That was the most comprehensive and best source of resources that I've seen in the last 6 weeks. And so take a look if you need resources. The in-person centers and things like that are really helpful because one of the things that we found is fraud is rampant through this recovery process. I don't know who's calling me because FEMA uses cell phones, Red Cross uses cell phones. And so going in person and getting that information means you're really talking to somebody that is real and has, honest information. Third, as we go forward, our community is gonna be recovering, the West Side is gonna be recovering for another decade. And what's really critical is having a narrative, not just of recovery, but of infrastructure, how to build fire-safe communities, whether that means, going to brush clearance, things like that, but also how to build fire-safe homes and buildings and things like that. Because somebody else in California another community is gonna go through this year in fire season. And so, setting up best practices of how to build it as infrastructure is a really critical thing and can help also the insurance process going forward, which is also a critical element. And then finally, we have a 7-year-old who's smirking at me, the child and school part of it is really important. So many kids have been displaced from their schools, and then it's not even that, it's also the, climate change, power outages, Zoom school, and all of that around that. We have, power outages pretty frequently in Malibu. Didn't, affect us in the same way as it has since the fires. And so how to set up an infrastructure where the kids that are impacted by, these fire threatened communities can thrive and in the best way possible and have school and have those types of best practices. So thinking through that for the communities impacted. So thank you, and thank you everybody for your thoughts as well.
Thanks, Shai, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Naomi, and thank you for the whole panel being up here. Obviously, everybody's taking their time on a Saturday to be able to be as helpful as possible. All of you out there who have been directly affected or are friends and family and are obviously being here on a Saturday as well. We hope that we can all be as helpful of a resource as possible. I'm Mike Newhouse, as was said in the introduction. I serve on the Los Angeles City Planning Commission. So as you can imagine, we're very directly involved in the recovery efforts and what's happening on the ground up in the Palisades. Let me start with that perspective, which I'm of course happy to answer any questions from and to stick around as long as need be after for that. One of the good things that as commissioners we're getting daily detailed email briefs from the mayor's office about exactly what's happening on the ground and what kind of resources are available. So I'm happy to answer as many in-depth questions as you might have, because I probably have a lot of information on that. I did also just come from a briefing with the mayor this morning, which was in-depth as to what's happening right on the ground right now, the transition from the center in the West Side Pavilion over into the Palisades in the rec center itself. So that's going to be available, as a lot of you know, but I did get a lot of very new, up to the minute information from Mayor Bass this morning. So happy to talk about that. The other reason I think I was asked to join this panel is I'm an attorney. I'm a land use, planning, building, environmental attorney for a very long time, so I'm happy to answer questions from that standpoint. But we also have a very heavy insurance coverage specialty within my firm. And what we did right when these fires happened is we sent out sort of 8 do's and don'ts in terms of insurance coverage when you're first of all tendering your policy, obviously to get your coverage, but then what you want to do in terms of your record keeping, right? What you want to do in terms of not making sure that you're commingling GoFundMe, where you might be having people help you, or you might be getting money from FEMA, or you might get money from your insurance company. These are all different buckets you want to make sure that are kept separately and that the records are very clear on that. Thank you, Jane. What I do have for you on the back, in the back, is those 8 points, those do's and don'ts. We have put them on a little piece of paper there on our letterhead. They're in back there for you. I can send them to you electronically as well. I do want to emphasize that I am an attorney. You'll see that on my letterhead. We're not charging people for any of this, okay? We have a lot of friends, a lot of family, a lot of clients who've lost their homes. I'm happy to sit down with you 15, 20 minutes, half hour, whatever it is, you can give me a phone call, I'll work you through that. We're not soliciting any business. And one of the main points that we make there Yeah, and it's been made also, I think Naomi, you made a good point about this, and I think Shai did as well, which is, if there are lawyers, public adjusters that seem to be targeting you, calling you, saying they wanna help you, you shouldn't need any of that, okay? All that's gonna do is take a percentage of your recovery, you're gonna be paying somebody hourly to do that, and you shouldn't have to. If you tender your policy and you are denied coverage, okay, has anybody in the room been denied any coverage yet? I would hope not, and I would think not, but if that happens, then you maybe do wanna talk to a lawyer or a public adjuster, but at this point, you should not need to do that, okay? The other thing I wanna point out, if there's been a delay on it, is when you tender that policy, they need to get you a response within 15 days, okay? So if anybody has tendered a policy and you haven't had a response from your coverage within 15 days, that's problematic, okay? They need to be able to do that for you. So if anybody has questions on that vein, I'm happy to answer those. But the main thing I wanna do is just be quiet at this point, and hopefully there will be a lot of questions for all of us. If you're not comfortable asking questions for us up here, sometimes that's a little awkward. I know most of us will be around after for as long need be, so feel free to just come up to me and ask me whatever questions you have. Again, thank you for letting me be here, and I hope we can be helpful. Thanks.
Pass it down. Yeah, pass it down. Do you want to take this?
I can speak loudly too, for people who think it's gonna be cumbersome to be passing back
It's gonna be cumbersome to be passing the mic back and forth. I'm gonna open it to Q&A. I do wanna put a fine point on something that was said about we wanna be getting people to rebuild more quickly, but we also wanna be able to rebuild more safely. And what happened in the Palisades fire, there's analysts who've been looking at this a long time, who, say that, who've been modeling the risks at Palisades, saw a lot of this coming, and categorizes, this isn't just a wildfire that we saw in the Palisades. This was an urban conflagration in which the homes themselves became fuel. So we have to figure out.
Fire NATO.
Well, it wasn't just a fire NATO, because that's weather that a fire makes, but this is where actually the homes themselves became the fuel that then created, that burned down entire communities. And so that's just to your point, Shai, I just wanted to put a fine point on that, and I wanted to just also pick up on something that Corey said, that hopefully that you caught, which is that she rebuilt her home, her guest house, to be fire-wise, and it survived the Woolsey fire. I can tell you that I'm in a canyon over from her, but if Woolsey fire was the worst punch the Santa Monica Mountains ever had in history, or in recorded history in terms of fire, we were the nose. And if her home survived and her main house didn't, that's pretty strong evidence that you can rebuild in such a way that will keep you safer. Will it be 100% safety? There never is, but there is a lot that we can do, and I have a lot to say about that. But if I get started, I won't stop, and I will look at the Q&A. So with that, I want to open it to all of your questions, both people here and in the room. Please, yes, sir.
To the planner, how does SB 9 and 10 fit into this? We're assuming we're going to go with single residential.
Yeah, to answer that question, I think I'm fine without the mic unless it's messing up the filming of anything, but thank you for the question. It's not gonna have any direct impact. Currently, it's not, envision that SB 9 or 10 would be directly affected by this. But yeah,
Sorry, I can't hear you too
well. Well, maybe we do need the microphone.
And for the rest of the people that might not know what SB 9 and 10 is, could that be explained too, please?
So for everybody else out there, SB 9 and 10 goes to how you can subdivide your lots in single family areas, Plan 1 planning, 1.5 planning, et cetera, and 2s of your zoning. And it's a state senate bill is what it is. It's been around for quite some time. What we don't anticipate happening is any sort of change in use in terms of how you would apply SB 9 or SB 10 in terms of additional density. you can do what you can do under those Senate bills and under obviously city ordinance and city regulation. But what is certainly gonna be thought about here is what are we gonna rebuild? What kind of single family home? As you know, right now, you can build your home plus 10%, right? That's going to be an expedited process. You're not gonna have to go through the normal channels of the planning department. But as many of you have heard, and there are different opinions about this, some people believe that you should be able to build more than that 10% on an expedited basis, right? There are a lot of homes in the Palisades or affected areas that were 1,200 square feet, 1,300 square feet. And a lot of folks that have been living in those homes for a long time are probably gonna decide not to relocate back into the Palisades because of age or where they are in life, et cetera, et cetera. When new folks are coming in, families, younger people who would these days need more space than that, the debate is starting to become, well, should you be allowed more than 10%? Should you be allowed 15, 20, 25%? What is that number to really incentivize people to come in and rebuild quickly and rebuild something that people will want to move into? So again, to circle back on your question, there's not gonna be a direct effect in terms of how 9 and 10 are applied, at least it's not anticipated yet. But this issue of size and what you can build on those lots and how you're gonna do it, that is going to be an issue.
Excuse me, that's what you say, and I appreciate it, because you're an authority. But it's a state law. It overrides. It says that you can build 4 units on a single lot and about 12 or more, like on Sunset Boulevard. Okay, so I'm gonna reiterate it. It's overriding, which I think it's overriding what you're saying. You're basically you're compromising, mitigating, I think, but please clarify that. Does the state law override these basically the city has to comply.
The city does have to comply, and SB 9 and 10 have parameters of what you can build on what otherwise was only a single family lot for people that aren't familiar with it. And in a lot of single family communities, it's become very divisive, right? There are a lot of people who don't want a 4-unit, 6-unit building next to their single family home in a single family neighborhood. There have been lawsuits about it, right? A lot of money has been raised to fund anti-SB 9 lawsuits. We all know about that. There was even a movement to recall, to go ahead and overturn by ballot measure SB 9. It's extremely controversial in a lot of communities. What I would say is this, and this isn't me speaking as an authority or a planning commissioner or anything else. This is me as somebody who's been in sort of the building community, the planning community, the development community for 25 years. I would be absolutely floored and shocked if the basic character of the Palisades does not stay the way it is. People simply that want to return to the community want to come back to the community they're in. And I think that if there is an over push for an irrational amount of density, you're probably going to see a lot of lawsuits in response to that. So I think that between the state and the city, there's going to be a consensus that the community should retain the quality that it had. That's just my prognostication. I don't know if for sure that's true, but that's my feeling.
Hi, before we go on to more questions, we have Senator Ben Allen who's dropped by. Senator, did you want to say a word or two, or you just want to wave at the folks?
It's up to you, whatever.
Well, come on up and give us a couple of minutes and be available to answer questions.
While we're waiting for Senator Allen, I just want to touch on another thing. The move back rate for, for example, the Santa Rosa fires up in Northern California, where Senate Majority Leader McGuire, that's his district, was about 85%. The economics around this fire are so different. And the move back rate was about 85% because most people were underinsured and they built the same or smaller houses than what they had previously. And so, in terms of the expediting permitting and all of that stuff and rebuilding these communities quickly, I think 2 things. One, I think the quickest rebuilds are gonna be those, obviously up to 10%, but I think a lot of those houses may be smaller. And then B, I think the really big concern from so many community members is that the affordability of rebuilding is gonna be so challenging that, the developers are gonna come and buy these lots and then build in, potentially cheaper, non-fire safe or not as maximal fire safe ways, and then resell the lots, and rebuilding these communities in, not the most fire safe way. And so, I think that most of the houses that were gonna be, single family homes, most likely, expedited, and built at the same or smaller levels, and that's gonna be, the sort of that regeneration of the community in the short term.
Alright, Senator,
All right.
you're up.
I really appreciate it. Okay, all right. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again to our wonderful Dem Clubs and headquarters to pull this all together. It's such a great example of this kind of broader civic role that they play. And it's been a very difficult past month. Obviously, our horrific fires, and then all of the madness from Washington, D.C., which has both been really troubling from a basic American norms perspective, and then it also layered onto it is the veiled threat of breaking with precedent, many years of bipartisan precedent of support for American communities in times of need, such as ours right now. And so it's one of the very many difficult things that we're dealing with right now as we try to navigate this moment in time. As you know, as we mentioned, the legislature has been deeply involved in this process. It's a strange. There's about 558 new issues that have been raised by this fire. From and one of them, of course, is the very strange Smorgasbord of governments in Los Angeles. We largely have a federal operation happening with US EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, and of course, the FEMA folks that are dealing with the actual assistance. And then they're handling the management of this with the locals. It's working with the city of Los Angeles and the city of Malibu, and of course the county of Los Angeles as well. The state has been playing a technical assistance role through Cal OES and through Cal Recycle. We've also played a major role as a pass-through, so we put up $2.5 billion to get the cleanup process started, and that's of course going to be reimbursable from the federal government. The governor just put in a $42 billion supplemental request yesterday to the federal government to address the massive costs that we are expecting to bear as a result of the cleanup. There's also a whole slew of bills that are now being presented on both sides of the legislature, the Assembly and the Senate, to address all sorts of different issues relating to the fires. And I heard some of the discussion on SB 9, happy to talk more about that. But there are so many different issues that are bubbling up as they relate to existing law. We obviously need more flexibility in various elements of the law. Folks were on a call just a couple nights ago with Assessor Prang, for example, talking about the way the assessment system works and make sure that folks are not getting unduly screwed by the tax system or rigidities in the tax system. It's part of why I'm working with Assessor Prang right now on a bill to provide more property tax relief in general for folks that have been impacted by the fires, both on the nonprofit side and then also for homeowners. So our bill provides extended deadlines to rebuild the devastated property in order to transfer the base tax year of the original home onto the rebuilt home. It also would extend the deadline for the filing of misfortune or calamity claims. So this was all about ultimately providing more flexibility for folks that have suffered from the fires. We're also working on a bill through our Senate package that extends protections for homeowners and tenants and mobile home residents in the wake of the emergencies. Two major mobile home parks were, of course, flattened during the fires, including the beautiful Palisades Bowl where my mom's best friend lived. One of the many tragedies. So the bill seeks to both convene mortgage companies to provide temporary mortgage loan forbearance relief for homeowners. It also allows tenants to recover a portion of their paid rent if the tenancy agreements terminate due to the wildfire. It establishes temporary rent control for mobile homes in areas that were subject to a state of emergency. And then it builds on existing protections for mobile home owners' rights to return after the destruction of a mobile home park. One of the challenges with the mobile home park there is that for most folks who lost their home, at least they can go back to the land. As terrible and as tragic as it is to go back to your property, I've met with many friends who've gone back to their properties that have burned down. But the mobile homeowners literally have no, they have no idea what's going to happen, because while they own the property on top of the land itself is owned by these owners, and of course there's a bizarre dispute going on. It turns out that the former owner of the mobile home park deeded the park to his mistress and his ex-wife, I guess, and so they're up both, anyway, it's a whole thing. We're also working on the Fight for Firefighters Act, which extends a full-time employment for all of those seasonal firefighters that we had at CAL FIRE. Part of the challenge we've now come to understand is that it's no longer, there's no such thing as fire season anymore. And then we're working on speeding up residential rebuilds following a state of emergency, creating an insurance community hardening commission to create data-driven statewide minimum fire standards for mitigation, particularly in the home hardening space. There's a number of Senator Stern's doing a bill on flexible licensing for nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And then of course, there's all this work happening on the budget side, both with one-time disaster relief funds for families and individuals that are unable to get assistance through other funding streams like FEMA. We're also stepping up to help the school districts, including Santa Monica Malibu, which has taken in something like 400 new students. And there's districts all over the area that are taking in students. One of the challenges we have, of course, is that for basic aid districts like Santa Monica Malibu that are not funded by on a per pupil basis from the state, they get their money from property taxes. Okay. Sure, awesome, maybe keep going. Wonderful, okay. So we're working to make the school districts whole, including Beverly Hills Unified, which I think had been turning away students partly because they were afraid they weren't going to be reimbursed. We're having a meeting with them this week with other school districts too. We're making it very clear they're all going to be made whole. Please do the right thing, school districts. I know Santa Monica Malibu has been. They're going to take in these students for the time being, and they will be reimbursed. They will be made whole as part of that process. So I know the congressman's here, and there's so much happening on cleanup. We can certainly talk more about that, and utilities, air quality issues as well. But I'll hand the microphone over to the congressman, and then we can all handle questions together along with the panel on whatever issue folks want to bring up. So with that, our great congressman, Brad Sherman. Thank you.
Great to have a partner like Ben. Hello, I'm Brad Sherman, and for decades I've been known as Brad Sherman, America's best named city, Sherman Oaks. A couple of years ago, the gods of redistricting decided that the Palisades and all the surrounding communities should also be part of my district. Whether they knew what challenges would arise from that, I don't know. But I'm glad Ben's here because there's one area where FEMA is walking. And that is, we do the first EPA phase 1 cleanup. Then we do the Army Corps of Engineers second phase cleanup. And then you'd think you'd want to test to see whether it's safe. And FEMA is opposed to doing the testing.
Yeah.
So we have to have the state do the testing. And they're pretty confident that they're going to remove 6 inches of soil for the whole community. They think that that they're real confident they know, but people need to live there. We need the testing. The date I've got to drive home for people, March 10th. FEMA and the SBA have an absurdly short deadline. You have to apply with both FEMA and SBA. And even if you get rejected or what looks like an initial letter of rejection or they need more, whatever it is, you gotta get that application in. In normal times, this deadline, the executive branch realizes that deadline's ridiculously short and they extend it. And if you think that the executive branch is operating as if these are normal times. You haven't been paying attention. So don't wait for them to extend the deadline. Go home, log in and do it. If you want a lot more information, you go to bradsherman.house, that's for House of Representatives, bradsherman.house.gov. We just had a telephone town hall. I don't know how many of you were on the line, but one survey question I took during the town hall was saying, if we're going to fight to just double one of the two programs, which is the priority to fight? Now, what are the two programs that are available? And this is to rebuild the home. There's a grant of $43,600 from FEMA, money you get to keep. And this is only, of course, if you have uninsured losses. If you're fully insured, government is going to then add more. But there's a grant of $43,600. Or the SBA loans up to $500,000, usually at a rate of below 3%. And I said, if I have to fight to double either the $43,000 grant or the $500,000 of loan availability, which should I fight for? And obviously, everybody wants me to do both. But by over 2 to 1, they said fight for the loan. I'll be fighting for all of this, and the governor has put together a plan, and that plan, I think, is a good one. All I have to do is convince my colleagues that they want to send $40 billion to California. We'll see. But that plan has really full reimbursement for state and local government for all the costs that they have, and a program to apply for to get additional grants. And I've talked to the governor and his people. We're going to move that. We're going to emphasize more those SBA loans. And the program does call for appropriation to the Small Business Administration. It's substantial to do just that. Now, is John on for back? Hello. Oh, there he is. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the mechanics of all this. And this applies whether it's a Palisades fire issue or any other issue you're having with the federal government. Imagine the federal government makes a mistake. It could happen, could affect you. You call John. He works very hard. He solves your problem. And then I, Brad Sherman, take the credit. It's an excellent system. For that to work, you need our phone number. That's why I put it on the comb. And if you're looking at me, you realize why I don't forward the combs to myself. I've had a few discussions, and concerns about the president and how he reacted to all this. You may have caught one line in the inaugural speech where he says Los Angeles is still burning, actually smoldering still, a few places, without even a token defense. And you know, a few days later, he was here meeting the firefighters, who I think put on one hell of a defense, although the conditions were very difficult, and of course we lost a lot of homes. Then he flies out, and I was so pleased with FEMA being able to open that center on Pico Boulevard, and they're working 12 hours a day, and he says we ought to abolish FEMA. And I had an argument with the president on that. He's got this crazy idea that every state should be prepared for a massive disaster with their own resources, which is crazy for California and absolutely insane for Rhode Island. But just if you're trying to get people to work 12 hours a day in the midst of a crisis, and this was just right there at the beginning of all this, you don't say, oh, and I want to abolish your agency. And then he tells them that he wants them to quit. We'll give them 8 months pay for quitting. Oh, and there's a hiring freeze. And then that hiring freeze also applies to the federal firefighters. So he attacks us for not raking the forests. He's telling the firefighters to quit, offering them 8 months pay, and freezing. And oh, by the way, a lot of this is seasonal. So a hiring freeze for a seasonal agency leaves that agency totally frozen when they need to gear up and do their job.
Sorry to interrupt, but I promised no politics today.
Oh.
Yes, please.
Thank you
Please
very
stop.
much.
So,
Yeah,
sorry,
thank
so,
Can I ask some
like-
questions,
so if
perhaps?
you could take some
Maybe?
questions.
I will definitely take some questions. I know this is being sponsored by Democratic Plus, and this is the first time I've been at a Democratic
Well,
Plus.
since you're a representative, I have a question about the governor's EO after this fire. I believe it's EO 425 to put a stay on the coastal act. So LA Times just came out and interviewed us last week, Liam Dillon, I'm not sure if you know him. But we lost our home in the Woolsey fire 6 years ago, and we still haven't rebuilt. And as you know, the fact is that only a third of the homes have been rebuilt. And the reason why we haven't been able to rebuild is because of the Coastal Act and all the hoops we have to go through. We've been trying to rebuild a hardened home by, adhering to the LA County Fire Code, which triggered this biological assessment of the ESHA that we now live in, that we didn't know we lived in until the Coastal Act implemented it after the home was built. So we've got all these hoops to jump through, and then the EO 425 says they're gonna put a stay on the Coastal Act, but then Liam Dillon from the LA Times informed us that really, it's just parsing words, you still have to deal with the Coastal Commission. I just want people to know in Palisades that are affected by this recent fire, that this EO is probably not worth a dime. And you're still gonna have to deal with the Coastal Act. So what I'm asking you, as our elected official, is to maybe at least put a revision in it to include people on the Woolsey fire that are maybe, 300 homes for Malibu, and also the Franklin fire. But
We
you
have,
put some teeth to that EO, because it's like, we're still dealing with the Coastal Commission, and it's ridiculous. We want to put a 15,000 gallon modified container for our own water so we can defend our home, because as you know, there's not gonna be any pressure in the hydrants. And we also wanted a fire hardened driveway that's wider, there's a requirement to us to make a wider driveway, a longer driveway, so it had less of a pitch to come in, and a larger turn radius off the street, because it's like, this is for their trucks to come, but the irony is, the trucks never came up. So the trucks aren't gonna show up, we've gotta jump through hoops to put in this, expensive driveway that requires caissons and retaining walls and everything else. And I'm fine with that, I'm fine with living up to the current fire code to make things safer. But I want 15,000 gallons of water on our property too, because we know that the only way you're gonna save your home is to do it yourself.
So the Coastal Act is a state issue,
And it is.
and we have a state senator here, and I wonder, Senator, if you are able to speak to this, because there are situations.
There are situations in like
That
with
microphone's fine.
Sorry, there are situations like this gentleman's here in which people are caught between coastal code and fire codes and and the jurisdictions that they happen to be living in are not finding the wiggle room to somehow work out a reasonable solution. So I wonder if you can speak to that.
yeah, so we've had a couple of community meetings involving the Coastal Commission, and they keep telling us they're working really close, hard to reconcile these kinds of things. My staffer Nick is sitting right behind you. I'd love to, if there's anyone in the room here who has this particular problem, with some sort of discrepancy with the Coastal Act and Fire Code, we want to help you, because they're telling us that they're working through these issues. That's what they keep telling us, so.
We live in Malibu, so, there's a whole entirely different problem there with the way Malibu is structured as a city. And the way anything can get done with their local coastal program, and it seems to be that nobody has authority to do anything. They have, from what I've read in the local coastal program, they have the authority to put a stay on these things in an emergency situation like this. But nobody has, the intestinal fortitude to do anything. And so they point fingers at somebody else, but then it's like, tell me who can and who has authority. From what I saw on this last EO from Governor Newsom after this last fire, that looked good to me. But apparently Liam Dillon from the LA Times read it and said, it's like, there's nothing to this, you're still gonna have to jump through hoops.
All right, we'll call, I know Liam, I'll talk to him. You know, with regards to the city, it's funny. There apparently was a while back, I think John Burton just decided to write a couple cities' local coastal plans from the state because there was so much hemming and hawing at the local level. Maybe we ought to do that. But Santa Monica's got the same problem to some extent. But I'll talk to the mayor too and see what specific is happening with Malibu with regards to your. This is really more a coastal commission issue, isn't it?
Well, it's both, but in my opinion, because it's like, our house was built prior to Malibu even becoming a city, right? And so it's like Malibu became a city, and then coastal commission basically forced Malibu to adopt these like LCPs, the local coastal program, right? Just a cut paste sort of thing. But there's still provisions within the local coastal program that allow local municipalities to put a stay or make some changes or revisions to their local coastal program. But nobody seems to have the authority or wants to stick their neck out to do it.
I mean, just from my
Just
interaction
from a
with
local point.
Yeah.
But then it's like, all right, if you don't wanna do it, elevate it up to the state. And then based on this last fire, it looked like they identified where the quote unquote red tape is, coastal commission. And they put a stay on the coastal act, but from what Liam Dillon was reading, it's like, there's no teeth to this.
Yeah. If what you're doing is really just about like fire hardening, then that there shouldn't be a problem. So, if you're doing more than that, then
No, we're living within the 10% rule.
Okay.
Our footprint of the original house is within that. And it's like, and in my opinion, there's a lot of subjectivity to some of this interpretation of developed area, quote unquote, developed area on our property. And it's like, so because we wanted to have this modified 15,000 gallon container to also as a pool, but they look at it, oh, it's just a pool, it's like, no, we want this with pumps to rooftop sprinklers to harden our home because we know that nobody's gonna defend our home. We need to do this, right? And so it's 2 feet inside their quote unquote ESHA, their map that they drew after the house was built. You know, and they didn't give us any notice when they drew up the ESHA lines. You know, they didn't give us any notice to comment or contest it. And so now we have to live in this theoretical ESHA, and then we have to spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for a biological assessment to prove otherwise, which we did. And then they said, no, that's not enough. They keep moving the goalposts and come up with a dozen new items to adhere to.
okay, clearly there's a lot of details we'll have to, you know, get more information about it. I mean, again, I don't work for the coastal commission.
No, I get it, but that's the problem. That's the root of the problem.
Yeah, well, so please trade information with Nick and I'd love to help you because certainly we're not, I don't think any of us want to be in a situation where the agencies are jamming up your ability to home harden.
Well, there's promises from 2018, Governor Brown, Governor Newsom, met with Trump back then and say, oh, we're gonna cut the red tape and we're gonna expedite everything. Well, that's lip service, and the exact same things have been said this time around.
Yeah, I
And
hear you.
I just wanna be the voice for people that have just lost their homes, because it's like, I fear that this is gonna happen again, and now there's thousands of homes.
100%, we need to be, yes, thank you, and we need to be doing deep dives and learning both what was done well from fire, you know, from recovery stories and that which has not gone well, because most of the homes from Woolsey still haven't been rebuilt. Yes, ma'am, you've been waiting very patiently.
Hi, I'm Melanie Ellswood, we've spoken.
Hello,
Nice to
Facebook friends.
nice to actually meet you in person, and thank you for organising this. I came to this meeting because I'm a Woolsey fire survivor, and I rebuilt my home. It took 3 years, but I'm actually back. I've been dealing with landscaping for another 3 years because of neighbours and.
Would you mind standing up?
Yeah, sure.
So the people in the back can't.
Yeah,
hear
sorry.
it all.
Hi, I lost my home in the Woolsey fire, and I rebuilt it. It took 3 years, 3.5 to get back in my house. I'm still dealing with landscaping, but I am one of the lucky 38% that is home. So I'm here because I now moderate a Facebook group. I don't know if any of you are on Facebook. If you are, I would encourage you to come join us. We started it after Woolsey, and it was really a self-help group for all of us who've been impacted. But now it's become alive again, and people are joining us from the Palisades fire, even the Eaton fire. We changed the name of it. It's called Homes Lost in the Malibu Fires. It's a private group. If you come and join us there, it's just a self-help group for people who've been through it, and maybe you could learn from our experience. Gather opinions on debris removal, which companies to use. what path to take with regards to rebuilding. So, look it up on Facebook, I'm one of the admins, we can admit people if you just tell us where your property was, and we would love to be of use. If you can benefit from our experience, then that's how we pay it forward, and maybe in a few years you'll do the same thing. I do have a couple of things I did want to bring up as we have representatives here I wasn't expecting. The first thing I would like to say is I'm hearing all of the benefits that people who've lost their homes in this fire are being promised, coastal commission, other issues. Anything that is offered to survivors of this fire needs to be retroactive to people who lost their homes in the Woolsey fire as well. My friends here are living in trailers. Can you
For 6
imagine
years, more than 6
living
years.
in a trailer for 6 years whilst the buck is passed from department to department? Whatever you give to the Palisades victims, and I'm so sorry for anybody who lost their home, it has to be retroactive to people who have been waiting in line. Nobody should jump in front of my friends right now, I'm sorry, that's mandatory. So please make sure that that is addressed. A couple more issues as we have representation here. PCH, you have to get that road reopened. I understand the logistics and the issues that we're dealing with, but Malibu, it is an 80-mile round trip to get to Santa Monica right now. I have people trying to get to doctor's appointments, to physical therapy appointments. We are trapped. You have to open that road up because you are killing our businesses. Our local businesses have no custom. I went to Central Malibu on a weekend last Sunday. It is a ghost town. There will be no community left if that road is not reopened. It's not a matter of convenience, it's a matter of necessity. The other issue is the schools. Our parents are losing their minds because their kids have not been able to go to school in Malibu. And this is where I'm also going to point out the necessity of creating a separate school district in Malibu, because the Santa Monica district, which is based in Santa Monica and has 6 out of 7 representatives on the school board from Santa Monica, do not understand the specific needs of the Malibu community and the issues that we've had to deal with. First Woolsey, then the Franklin fire, now this fire, now the highway's been closed for 6 weeks. You have to do something for the Malibu community or else it will cease to exist, because people cannot put up with a constant disruption to their lives. So those are just a couple of points I wanted to make because we have Representative Sherman here and we have Ben Allen here. So thank you for that. I would like to say on a political level, Republicans lost homes, Independents lost homes, Democrats lost homes. I don't care. It doesn't matter. These are real issues affecting real people, and it has to transcend politics. And my last point, and thank you for being so patient with me, is I have a friend who lost her home in this fire who couldn't make the meeting, and also is unable to hop on Zoom, and she's asking if this meeting is being recorded. And if not, and you hold future meetings, it is, thank you. If you could distribute that link, that would be amazing. And if you hold any other future meetings, we will spread the word and get people out, because what you're doing is so important. And people who are in the middle of what I was in 6 years ago need this. So please keep doing it, and thank you for everything that you are doing. And I will shut up now, so thank you.
Thank you very much. This gentleman here, Jerry, has had his hand up for quite some time, so please.
My name is Jerry Rubin. I'm on the Santa Monica Urban Forest Task Force. I wanted to thank the West Side Democratic Headquarters, and particularly our Santa Monica Democratic Club, and the others for doing this. The Santa Monica is fortunate that we didn't get fires really. We got a lot of the winds and stuff like that. But I had a question, since some good people are here. I don't want to see our trees become a scapegoat in this fire, and I hear people do that. Our trees are precious. They help in our fight to make sure climate change is not with us. There's so many things. And I just want to know, are we going to be replanting Southern California as well as the homes? And all these urgent things, I just want to know, because I think it's crucial. I was talking with people from Tree People and everything, and there's a lot of agreement about that. And I just wanted to make sure that's on the table. And I just want to know if everybody is kind of with that in some way, because usually it's not talked about a lot, because I think people think like, well, it goes without saying. Of course we love our trees, but it needs to be talked about. They're valuable, they're needed. and they weren't the cause of the fire.
I want to speak to that, if I may. My mother was on the first Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. My uncle was the city councilman in West LA and one of the people who preserved the Santa Monica Mountains for the public. What happens in the Santa Monica Mountains in terms of the habitat and tree preservation, conservation, and loss is something that is, of course, dear to the people who live there, but it's a treasure for this region. It's a treasure for the world who comes to visit there. And I can say that where I am in far western Santa Monica Mountains, there are 6 years after Woolsey, there are black walnut, we had a couple of good rain years, there are black walnut trees that are 40 feet high. There are oak trees that are growing like mad. They need more time. They also need help with conservation and replanting. There are native plant societies, there's other societies that help with that. If anybody's interested in helping with that, that would be super welcome. Trees are ember catchers. The one thing about trees, not a great idea, 5 feet from your home. If you, and it's not a joke, I think we need to think about 5 foot, there's a lot of science that suggests that 5 foot clearance is real, and forest conservation is included, can really help to save homes. And we have to start thinking of that probably like we think about plumbing or taking the garbage out to the trash can or other things that a couple hundred years ago were not taken, we're like, what, we have to do that? We probably have to think about that if we're in high risk areas now, that we absolutely need our trees. We have to live with them safely as we rebuild. I'm aware of time and I'm aware that we have a city councilwoman who, Tracy Park, who has joined us. So I just want to say hello and thank you so much for being here. And Hap, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'd also like to acknowledge Santa Monica Malibu School Board Trustee Stacy Rouse and LA Unified School District Trustee Nick Melvoin's District Director Allison Holdorf, who's also a Palisades Fire survivor herself. So if anybody has any education related questions, please talk with either Stacy, Allison about that afterwards.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate your being here and listening to folks and fielding their questions and for your service at this really difficult time. We have Lisa Nugent in the audience, and she has been a successful Woolsey fire rebuilder and has documented her process very carefully. And Lisa, would you like to say something or have a question?
Yes, thank you. I know we're running out of time, I guess. But I have a question for the representatives to consider. Because the supply chain may be impacted with tariffs, we don't know. The workforce for rebuilding may be impacted by immigration changes. And I think that we really need your help in maintaining some kind of moderation in pricing of supplies. You know, we have so many homes, there'll probably be many different designs, many different materials used, but I'm sure there's going to be similar supplies that most houses will require. Is there any way that the state can create kind of a wholesale pricing for people? Because even if we bring pricing down 10%, that will be huge in the long run for each individual that's rebuilding their house. I think the average of rebuilding right now, I'm guessing, is anywhere from $600 to $800 a square foot. If we could save 10% and bring that down, maybe even more. But if you could consider warehousing materials for the rebuilders, the tax credits to people that give lower prices to those people that are rebuilding. I don't know, if you guys could just think about that, I think that would be a huge help for people over the next 5 years who are going to be rebuilding.
As some kind of incentivizing or just using your power of convening There's not, for example, in lumber, there's not a lot of lumber suppliers. And maybe there could be convenings with them about what would you need? You know, how can we do this together to help these communities rebuild? There's gonna be a lot of material that's needed. Maybe there is some kind of bulk pricing, or maybe there's something, you know, that would be, and using your power of the pulpit, to do that.
Whether or not government would be actually more efficient in providing building materials or retailing them.
I don't think that's the suggestion, but more just your
But I
incentivizing.
do want to address, the president has announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico and China. And when he was in the Palisades, I specifically asked him, some of you have seen the video, and would he consider exempting building supplies from that? Especially given the importance of lumber from Canada. He said, I think quite sincerely, that he would look at it. He then proposed the Canada and Mexico tariffs without that. I'm still trying to push this administration to exempt building materials. I'm working with the National Home Builders Association and others on that. I don't know, but obviously what happens is if you have these tariffs on the foreign suppliers, you may have some domestic supply, but that tends to go up to the supply meets demand point on your economic chart. And so even if you have a tariff on the foreign supply, you end up with higher costs on the domestic supply as well. So I couldn't agree with you more that this is not the time to have tariffs on building supplies in the United States. Also, the gentleman mentioned the importance of replanting. I was not in this area, my district didn't include this area for the Woolsey fire. What I did have, which they took away from me in the guides of redistricting, was the far north San Fernando Valley. And we had fire damage there. I was able to get a community project funded for tree people to replant that area. So trees are important, but as you point out, where they are and how they're maintained to avoid this kind of fire catastrophe is very important.
Thank you. Yes.
I don't know if this has been asked, but for those of us that are in the weeds of the Palisades fire, we kind of understand what EPA phase 1 looks like, because we're seeing that happen. For phase 2, which can either be private or public, can you just talk us through what that's like on site? You know, how the things are separated and removed, and can we trust private entities to do this safely? I trust the Corps, but can we trust these private entities?
So I can speak to that a little bit, but I also want to speak to phase 1 just for a second. But I'm gonna, and that's, you know, I wonder also, there's been some brought up in the press, there's been some concerns that the 6 inches of soil testing in phase 1, that wasn't enough in previous fires to remove toxicity, and it's really important that people move back to non-toxic sites. So I want to answer your question quickly, but I also would love to hear about, you know, what about this, is 6 inches enough? What are we gonna do about that? But the process on site, the contractor we work with is licensed to do this, it's done it many, many times. You know, it was bulldozers came and removed the stuff. What was kind of extraordinary was that we found a precious heirloom in the jaws of the bulldozer. That was pretty crazy. I mean, it was a very compromised cause, but it was still very emotional. So I think Jenny talked about how her experience with the public, this is private. And how can we trust that they do this safely? As far as I know, they're held to standards through their license that have to be, you know, and processes that are similar to the public folks. I mean, the public folks are also contracted out. It's not like there's a public official who comes in. I mean, so I think they're held to the same standard. And, you know, she had a very respectful experience with the public contractor who did it. So I can talk to you more, you know, or anybody more, this is a like kind of loaded, big story, I don't wanna take up too much time, but that's at least a thumbnail, and I'm happy to talk to you more about it afterwards. And maybe you can talk about phase one and the 6 inches controversy.
Phase one is moving now. Phase two will start in the areas where they've done phase one. I think they're moving faster on this fire than they have in the past. As far as the risks involved, this is the world's first Tesla fire. That is to say, the first time when you've seen so many electric cars be part of the damage. Not only electric cars, so many people have battery backup systems of various types. There's more lithium ion than I think in any fire in history. I have no idea how dangerous that is or whether that adds much to the concerns. I think you said you trust the Corps. The Corps is basically a contractor, a acquirer and overseer. So if you trust the Corps, you've got to trust them doing that. They don't actually come in with their own bulldozers. So if you think they've done a good job in the past, in other places, they've done a good job by hiring the right people and overseeing. That being said, as to, and they are very convinced that 6 inches is enough. But the test is in the pudding. FEMA's not willing to pay for testing. And so I'm talking to the state as to, I mean, a lot of federal resources are going to come to the state. One way or another, we have to get the testing. Because the best way to know whether 6 inches is enough is to go in after they do the 6 inches.
So I just want to comment that you can do your own testing. Right? I mean, we don't have to rely on the government to do our testing.
You can, and if you can afford to. And speaking of affording, you're all gonna have to either sign this form to do phase two yourself, or to have the Army Corps do it at no additional cost. Now, what the Army Corps will do is, some of you have insurance policies that have a specific amount the company is going to pay for debris removal. So if that's the case, you might say, well, I want to keep that money and do the debris removal myself. Or you might say, I'm going to give that money to the Army Corps and have them do it. But the vast majority of you do not have a specific, a great insurance policy with a specific amount for debris removal, or your debris removal amount is quite small compared to the cost of debris removal, which can, I mean, I've seen situations where it's as high as $170,000. I don't think it's that high for many of you, but I've seen numbers that big. So that being the case, if you can make a decision, sign the form now, because the Army Corps will be much more efficient if they know all the community, all the homes. And also, the sooner you sign, the sooner you get the debris removal. So if you want the debris removal, sign now. If you've got to decide whether to have the Army Corps do it, take some time now and figure that out. If you're going to do it, sign the form. A final issue is, part of that form has this absurd provision where you have to indemnify the government for wrongful, negligence of the contractor that they hire and supervise. It's absolutely outrageous. What I'm pressuring them to do is to make sure that these contractors have plenty of insurance, so that if, God forbid, they do anything wrong, it's the insurance company that's writing the check. So the one thing I'd urge is, make a decision and either get your own people in there to do the debris removal, or I think in most cases have the Army Corps do it, but make up your mind, and if you want them to do it, sign that.
It's what my concern was more about, not just the safety on site, but the safety of those materials leaving on trucks, and they're saying there might be 140,000 truckloads coming in and out of the Palisades, down PCH, down the 10th, down the 405. All that dust, we all share that air and space. And do we have appropriate eyes on that, whether it's public or private, to make sure that that is safely being hauled out of there?
The Army Corps has some specialty. Let's see if they do their job. And the last thing we need is uncovered trucks with that dirt.
Which is already
If the trucks aren't covered, they fail debris removal 101.
that's maybe something if you know, to ask either your, if you are hiring private, ask them these questions, they're great questions to ask. Ted,
Yes.
hello.
Hi, Vice President of Malibu Democratic Club, attorney for 50 years. Lost my house in Big Rock, which I moved living somewhere else. I have a question relating to how are we going to prevent future fires in Malibu and in the Palisades? If we don't do it, maybe the government under eminent domain ought to buy all of Malibu and the Palisades and take it over and make it a national park or a state park. You know, if you don't let people rebuild, then take it over. But my question is, what are we going to do to prevent fire in the future in Malibu and the Palisades?
Okay.
We're gonna, as to what happens to the parts of Malibu or all of LA that did not suffer fire damage. I mean, we got fire issues all over this county. I'll put that aside. Palisades and the parts of Malibu that were destroyed, we're gonna build back better. I'm stealing a slogan. In that chapter 7, I think it's chapter 7A of the state building code, says that if you live in a fire-prone zone, and we know that's the case, you have to meet these additional standards when you build back. And these additional standards, I'm told, by do not raise the cost of reconstruction by very much. It's a matter of selecting the right materials, going with the right design, and I would urge you to have 5 feet of concrete around every part of the house. As to whether that new code is effective, I have asked professional firefighters, is there anything else you want in the code? They say, hey, just give us the code. They got a couple, and we saw in the Paradise Fire, 58% of the homes that met the new code survived, 18% of those that didn't meet the new code. So why, when we have this code for fire-prone areas, what happened in the Palisades? Almost everything in the Palisades was built before 2008 when this new code became effective. So if you lost your home, you're not gonna be allowed to build back unless you build back better.
Ben, what about brush clearance issues? You're looking at that, whether or not there need to be changes and who administers our land?
Yeah.
So what's the progress of that?
Yeah. So there's a significant portion of money in Prop 4, which we just passed, the big climate resilience bond, that will put resources into land management associated with fire mitigation, right? So it's nature friendly brush clearance effectively, and then I think controlled burns too. They were an important part of the natural process. Since the beginning of time, and unfortunately there was a planned controlled burn right next to your neighborhood a few years ago that was nixed because of some opposition from certain people in the neighborhood. So
I don't think so. It was government officials who were opposing it.
That's right, pressured by a few people in the neighborhood. But yes, it was ultimately a government official decision, 100%. That was she has to take responsibility. Of course, not the current. So there are resources for it. I think everybody in land management is hyper aware and very anxious to work with us. We want to get them some money to help with a good management system. It's not cheap. At least under the current rules, and one of the many challenges we have is how to find a more cost-effective way of, I know there's a lot of folks who want to have goats go up. There's all these restrictions we have on that. We've got to work through. I think if you were to ask people like, the MRCA leadership, they would like to have hand crews that would go, they would go through there and do a lot of the brush clearance that you're talking about. It's expensive. But what's more expensive is another catastrophic fire. So thankfully, we put a lot of money into Prop 4 for this in advance because we knew what a big problem this was. And so there's going to be some resources. And then we're gonna have to push for more resources, both from the federal government and the state. And we're gonna have to figure out as cost-effective a way of doing this as possible. But again, not doing it in a kind of clear-cut way. I mean, this has to be a way, do it in a way that's respectful of the special landscape that surrounds these communities. And so there's gonna be a lot of work in this space going forward. Thankfully, there's some resources, but we're gonna need some more.
If we don't do it, people are gonna move away.
Yeah.
Like they have been in Malibu.
Yeah.
It's gonna destroy the communities. The Palisades was destroyed. How many of those people are gonna rebuild? If they have the impediments, like this gentleman over here from Malibu was talking about, 6 years later, he's living in a trailer. You can't have that and have a community.
Thank you, Ted. There's, our congressman has to leave, and so does anybody have an urgent federal question quickly before he goes, before I go to people who haven't on any other issues?
I will say,
And preferably people who've actually lost their homes in the fire. But Barbara, can you have a quick?
Ben has a-
but I mean,
Oh, sorry.
I do want to say one last thing that said, I think the Palisades is a different story. But for folks that live, I mean, you lived in a neighborhood, but there are some people, I would like to see something along the lines of what you just described. For those folks that are living within the National Recreation Area boundaries that are deep into the wildlife, into the very high fire zone. I think we should set up a mechanism to buy some of that land right now. I think it's gonna be a lower cost right now. Quite frankly, from a management perspective, I'd like to see that land. There are some properties that are deep in the mountains that I think now's a good opportunity to get into public ownership.
Well, speaking as somebody who lives in there, and that's my beloved home, and there's other people here too. Everything has a price, I suppose, but some of us are multi-generational stewards of this land, and who tend to this land, who protect this land. We're not, and we're trying to be part of the solution. So be careful to use a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, to those people who are trying to keep the culture and the communities deep within the canyons, as you say.
There were 300 homes on the beach in Malibu burned. What are you gonna do about that?
That's a whole session unto itself. So there was a federal question. Barbara, did you have a?
Yes, I think it's a federal question. Barbara Burke, Malibu Times, and it might be beyond the purview of this, maybe you need another seminar, but is there any assistance? People are absolutely screaming from the small business community, as someone said prior, to mandate or give tax incentives for commercial landlords to not be able to evict and to accept less rental from our standing but very much suffering and struggling businesses.
There's no specific tax credit for landlords cutting businesses a break after a disaster. What there is the SBA's lower interest rate loans that are available to business, and I believe FEMA grants as well. So I realize people are looking at their bank accounts and saying, how am I gonna write a rent check? Why won't the landlord just not take the rent check? You gotta go higher upstream and say, can we get a grant or a loan to help the business? And again, I want to emphasize that March 10 deadline. If you're a business, March 10, so do it tomorrow. Go online, SBA and FEMA.
Thank you. And I do want to add to this statement and the sensitivity of, should people rebuild, should they not? That wherever we are, to quote my wonderful friend who started the community brigade in Malibu, we must take responsibility for where we live. And it's a lot of responsibility to live in the wild. Are we at next steps, or can we have, you have been waiting so patiently, sir. What,
I just had a
please?
quick question. Earlier you had mentioned phase 2, the issue with the foundations.
private or public. Can you explain that again? There was something about saving the foundation, or do you have to tear them out?
The public auction in Woolsey, and you have to confirm this for this fire, required taking out the foundation. You had to take out everything, they had to basically return it to virgin soil. The private auction, you can choose whether to keep your foundation, whether to keep your chimney, other, things that may be intact, or things that you want to save. So that's the.
If you want the Army Corps of Engineers to do the debris removal, you can tell them to try to keep your foundation. Or you can tell them, for God's sakes, get rid of the foundation. If your foundation, and this is true on the hill slides, is necessary to support your hill for your neighbors, they're not gonna take it. And as a practical matter, you probably want them to take it. In that, even if the foundation looks good, you've got piping and wires in there that have gone through an awful lot of heat. And even what looks like a good foundation may not be something you want to build back on. I'd be very hesitant to save a foundation unless it was necessary or parts of it were necessary to hold up the hill.
I would like to comment because I did keep my foundation, but with Ventura County, I had to test that foundation. I had to core through anything that was vertical and horizontal and test those slabs, compression test those slabs. So there's a whole report you have to do. Mine passed except for one very tiny slab which I replaced, but it saved me thousands of dollars.
I did not have to test my foundation because I wasn't using it as a foundation. I was using it as an underlayment for my foundation. And as I mentioned earlier, it saved me from having to get a grading permit, which saved me time, money, and hassle.
I just want to say that one of the things you can opt out, you can tell them to try to preserve the foundation or not. But they actually have acknowledged that even if you tell them to try to preserve the foundation because of the machines that they use, that they might not do as good a job as a private contractor or something like that. And they acknowledge that, and they're out in front of that they still may damage the foundation, even if you want them to preserve, so that I'm pretty transparent about it.
Thank you. There's a question in the back.
Palisades Fire, do you know if the debris removal they were without a pool? A swimming pool?
Oh,
Is it something that you want to preserve, or is it something you're hoping they'll take out?
I'm hoping they'll take out.
They won't.
I don't think so.
I actually, the Department of Sanitation just sent us all a note. Sorry to interrupt, I'm Allison on behalf of Nick, but I'm also a fire victim myself. We have a school and the Department of Sanitation just sent a note to all of the homeowners. I'm happy to give that to you, that Row will do it. So Army Corps will do it for you. They'll take the debris out and they'll figure out your water. If you hire someone privately, they're responsible to do that.
So they drain it and they're.
Yeah, but they do not want anybody draining their pool right now because it's toxic. So they want the Army Corps to do it, or if you pay someone privately for phase 2, they have to be responsible for that.
What do they do then? They take it out?
I would prefer to Tracy on this one.
Council
Member Carter.
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
I'm happy to chime in on the polls, because I worked really closely with Ellis down on this. If you are participating in the Army Corps of Engineer program, they're not gonna remove swimming pools. They won't take away a swimming pool as part of the debris removal. But all the pools right now are full of chunks of ash and gross water, and they're nasty. So if you're participating though in the Army Corps program, do not drain your pool. They're gonna use the water in your pool to tamp down dust for the debris removal. When they're done, if there's any water left in it, there's protocols to follow. If you're working with private contractors because you opted out, same process, they have to get the chunks out. But before any pool can be drained that is connected to a septic system, any pool, even if your house is still standing and your pool needs to be drained, you have to schedule a date to have it drained. We cannot have everybody open their pools on the same day and dump all of that into our sewer system that ends at Hyperion, because our infrastructure there is fragile. So you'll have to get a date scheduled to do that.
And I can add that there's people on Homes Lost in the Malibu Fires Facebook group, which is like hundreds of members, and is also open to people who lost in the Mountain Fire and the Eaton Fires, and all the LA fires. There are people there who lost their pools in Woolsey and have reconstructed, so they may have also some wisdom to share.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're over time, but we don't want to stop the conversations. But we do want to thank our panelists. If you could join me in a round of applause. And Cap, who was amazing, bought little gifts for each of our panelists. Those are the little plants there. She was taking it anyway, but that's okay. That's okay, I would have to. And so Hap's just gonna give us a couple words, but I know that our panelists are willing to stick around and answer some questions. Also, if you use the QR code to join our email list, it's the bottom, not almost bottom one there. We are going to send out all the handouts and everything to everybody, whether you're on Zoom or here, or you weren't here today, to you. So hold on, Hap, our chair is gonna say a couple words.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you again to all of our panelists, attendees, and virtual attendees. Very quick, I wanted to thank all of the clubs and organizations who helped put this event together. Westside Democratic HQ, Santa Monica Democratic Club, Pacific Palisades Democratic Club, Progressive Democrats of the Santa Monica Mountains, West LA Democratic Club, and Malibu Democratic Club. We did our best and to keep this a non-partisan, non-politicized event. And it's a challenge to do when we're political people. And but thank you all for respecting our efforts to keep this a resident-to-resident community information and resource exchange. So with that said, there's so much to talk about moving forward. And so please stay tuned for updates on our email blasts about panels and webinars that we will schedule in the future or planning to schedule in the future that will dive deeper into each of these topics that we touched on for a little bit today, such as insurance, rebuilding, public lands management, education, et cetera, because that's really how we will achieve results as needed. So again, I'd like to thank all of our elected officials, Congressman Sherman, Senator Allen, Dr. Shai-Roy, Councilwoman Tracy Park, Allison Holdorf here on behalf of Nick Melvoin. And I do see Brittany McKinley there, who does work with Mayor Bass's office. And last but not least, let's thank our panelists one more time: Diane Moss, Jennifer Waterhouse-Pietro, Corey Buckner, Naomi Goldman, Dr. Shai-Roy, Mike Newhouse, and Senator Allen and Congressman Sherman, who stepped in. Thank you all again, and please come talk to us if you have any other questions. For the rest of the week. Bagels.